This is Not Your Average Sports Chick, and as promised, we are in Newport Beach, California, and we are interviewing legendary sports agent Leigh Steinberg. In case you don't know who he is, a little movie called Jerry Maguire was based on his life. We had a great conversation with him about current events and past events, so come on in and join us. So I want to start off at the beginning. So did you, when you went to Berkeley, did you always know that you wanted to be a sports agent, or did it just inherently just become something you stumbled into with your first client, Bartowski?
There really was no recognized sports agentry when I began. Teams could simply hang up the phone and say, we don't deal with agents. So there was nothing to aspire to because there was no real profession. So I went to law school, intending on becoming a criminal attorney. Not an attorney who was a criminal, but probably a prosecutor. And I was a dorm counselor in an undergrad dorm, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm, and one of the students was Steve Bartkowski. In 1975, he became the very first pick selected in the first round of the NFL draft, and he asked me to represent him. So there I was, brimming with legal experience, never having practiced before, and I had the first pick, and we got the largest rookie contract in NFL history. We got to Atlanta, there were Klieg lights flashing in the sky. We were going to sign the next day at the airport, and a huge crowd was pressed up against the police line, and the first thing we heard was, we interrupt the Johnny Carson show to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney Leigh Steinberg have just arrived at the Atlanta airport. We switch you live for an in-depth interview.
Wow.
So I looked at him probably like Dorothy looked at Toto when they got to Munchkin Land, and I said, I guess we're not in California anymore. And then I saw the tremendous idol worship and veneration that athletes were held in communities across the country, how they could serve as role models.
Now, after that, did you have athletes coming and seeking your services, or after that, did you just feel like, all right, I'm going to go start pursuing other athletes? And I mean, was it kind of...
Well, the fact that the deal was the biggest of all time, and I was 25 years old, did attract some people, but I had to learn it as a profession after that, and I learned how to profile clients, that there were a certain number of players coming out of school that were willing to be role models, that would go back to the high school community and set up a scholarship fund, to the collegiate community and endow a scholarship and link them with the alums, and at the professional level a number of players that would set up charitable foundations using the political figures, community leaders, and other leaders in the city to help them execute a program. And so that type of athlete with good fundamental values from a strong family background, I knew was someone I could relate to. And so by profiling the type of player that I would talk to, I had a much better chance to relate.
Well, that brings me to Steve Young. You talk about, family values and someone who comes from a strong family morale, just a really class act individual. What was it like representing Steve? I mean, what was his personality like? You talk about psychology in football, and he was a very strong mind. What was it like to represent Steve?
Oh, it was really exciting, because here you had someone who was extremely bright, good family background, good values, wanted to make a fundamental difference in the world and help people who couldn't help themselves, and was superbly gifted at his position. The problem was that a alternative football league, the USFL, came along and sought him because they wanted to build an LA franchise, and having a good-looking, flashy quarterback would help them do that. And so he ended up signing the largest contract in the history of sports. The irony was that money was not his motivation, playing was. And after a couple of years there, he ends up in Tampa, which is a team that's losing, and so he experienced all sorts of running for his life. And then he ends up in San Francisco having to back up Joe Montana. And for Steve, the one thing that was critical always was to be participating, to be in the middle of the action. And so that was a very hard time. But he was a superb player and even better human being.
Well, it was pretty amazing that you stood up for him the way you did with the fans in San Francisco that were so obsessed with Joe Montana. They didn't really want to see anybody come on and take his place. And, you know, you stood up for him, and sitting on several years under Joe Montana, I'm sure it was a little bit of stressful considering the fact that Steve wanted to play and he wanted, you know, that was his motivation. Do you think that if he hadn't sat under Joe Montana all those years, his records would even be larger? I mean, his career would be significantly different than it even was?
So you look at it two ways. In the one sense, Steve wanted to be in San Francisco because it was Bill Walsh, it was a unique system. He felt like he could polish his skill set and end up being very successful. On the other hand, there's a few missing years where he ends up going back to law school because he was so bright and had so much energy that it was very, very difficult to sit behind Montana. And then as the transition occurred, Montana was such a beloved icon that there were people who honestly almost would rather see the team lose with Montana than win with Young.
Yeah.
So that's always difficult coming behind a legend, but he created a legend of his own.
Of course. So Steve Young was in your wedding, and then another major football player, the first African-American quarterback to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, Warren Moon, was also in your wedding. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with Warren.
Well, Warren and I almost grew up together because I started with him back in 1978. We were both very young, and he wanted to play quarterback. There were people who were changing his position. So at that time in football, there was a certain element of personnel people and front office people who felt that certain positions were maybe not appropriate for African Americans to play. The so-called thinking positions, which would be center, quarterback, middle linebacker, maybe safety. So you didn't see many African American players or black players at those positions. So Warren wanted to come out and start right away. Well, he had a couple impediments. One was that he played in a rollout offense, so he wasn't really playing in a traditional offense. And the second was that he was African American. He would have been drafted. It's a misstatement to think that he would just have gone undrafted. But he made a decision to sign in the Canadian Football League with the chance to play right away. Mm-hmm. And so he spent 6 years in Canada. And but he always knew that he could be successful as an NFL quarterback. That set it up in 1984 for him to choose between 12 teams and 3 leagues to come back as the first pure free agent, because there wasn't free agency in 1984. Mm-hmm. A talented and veteran at the most coveted position, quarterback, and it set off a massive bidding war where we traveled across the country going from place to place with various people offering all sorts of inducements, and Warren decided on Houston and then played 17 years in the NFL.
I remember reading that it was difficult for him to decide between Seattle and Houston because Seattle was, you know, his home, where his heart was, but he ultimately went with Houston where he had a very successful career. So that's fabulous. Tell me a little bit about client maintenance. You talk about client maintenance a lot, and people generally look at football players and, you know, as fans, and they don't see them as human beings. You know, they put athletes on this pedestal as if they're subhuman, but these athletes have feelings, they have emotions, and they need to be addressed. So tell me a little bit about client maintenance. You've been so successful at it for so long.
Well, the first key, I think, from the very beginning is to sit a player down and explain that playing professional sports carries more of a responsibility than simply playing the game, that there's a standard of conduct that they need to maintain. And that means being careful about alcohol, drunk driving, getting in fights, relationships with women. It means being careful about their interactions with fans, with the press, and if they don't want to do any of those things and conduct themselves in that way, they can always play on a sandlot. No one will ask anything of them, but then, of course, they won't be compensated that way. So it first involves making sure that an athlete understands, and then that they understand that the engine that pulls the train is their performance on the field. So that they've got to show a certain amount of dedication and prove to their owner, their team, the teammates, the coaches, that they're serious about this as a craft. And then they have many of the same problems that you would expect, which is that they're not starting, they're injured. Injury is a really difficult part of especially football, but all sports. But in football, every week in this office is like an episode of ER or Med Center. Yeah. So I have to have a physician's desk reference, which is what doctors use to be able to understand the different injuries. Sometimes they want to be traded. Sometimes they're having problems adjusting to teammates or with their marital or romantic situations. And in all those circumstances, I'm trying to keep them centered and balanced. Also, we need to prepare them for second career. So from the very beginning, be thinking about what skill sets they have other than athletic ones. So it's not by chance that 3 of our players are minority owners of actual NFL teams. Ray Childress in Houston, work done in Atlanta, and work done in Atlanta, and then Duron Cherry just divested himself of ownership of Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. But whether it's Brent Jones running a hedge fund, or Bruce Smith being part of a major construction company and owning part of a luxury hotel, or Troy Aikman having his broadcast career, part of maintenance is to look forward in the future and make sure that's a smooth transition. But these are very human relationships. You referred to Warren Moon. He and I went 23 professional seasons together as lawyer and client. So they become situations where there's a lot of caring and a lot of real emotion.
Now, talking about the NFL, you've been in this business for over 40 years, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes happen. What is the main changes that you've seen in the NFL? I mean, there's been a lot of bad publicity lately surrounding the NFL. I feel like social media has a lot to do with that. What is your take on the changes that you've seen since coming back into the game?
Let's start with the economics. When I began representing athletes, television was 3 main stations and a couple independents, and each team made as its share of the national TV contract $2 million. This summer, they cashed a check, each team, for $226 million. So we've seen the explosion of television, competitive bidding, loss leader bidding, and the ability to access more games, more analysis shows, more highlight shows, more feature shows, exponentially more of all of that. We've seen the explosion of franchise value. So in 1976, Tampa Bay and Seattle come into the NFL, and their purchase price is $16.5 million. Today, the Dallas Cowboys are valued at $4 billion. We've seen the growth of fantasy sports. So 45 million people are playing fantasy football every week. We've seen the growth of stadia, so that we have new stadia with amazing amounts of luxury boxes, premium seating where they pay more money to have drinks served at their seat, or to see television screens in a special section, jumbo scoreboards, signage, naming rights, revenue flow coming from every area of that. We've seen the size, strength, and speed of athletes be refined at a stunning level. So the defensive lineman who used to weigh 240 pounds now weighs 290. The offensive tackle who used to weigh 250 pounds now weighs 330. So we're talking about larger, bigger bodies moving at a faster rate of speed. And then we had the advent of social media. So all of a sudden the distinction between public and private for an athlete has been blurred or wiped away. The ubiquitous nature of the cell phone camera means that the minute an athlete leaves his home, he can be captured on imagery or a photograph that will convey a perception that may or may not be real. So every moment of their behavior is scrutinized, and instantaneously a random comment, an action can go worldwide. And so we now have a perception of athletic behavior as somehow deteriorating, where I can prove to you empirically that less athletes drive drunk, less athletes are involved in domestic abuse. We've got the statistics, less by far than their non-athletic peers. But when you see Ray Rice's case over and over and over and over again, it's hideous, it's horrific, but it's a night that happened. But you see it, and in the mind's eye, that's Ray Rice every second. That's what he does all the time, and that's every player all the time. And this is how players behave, where in point of fact, their behavior is reasonably circumspect. So it creates imagery, and we now have a jurisprudence section in newspapers where it highlights not simply an athlete, but high school, college, professional athletes, retired athletes, coaches, general managers, anyone around them. And that's put together as somehow representative of athletic behavior when the sample group is massive.
There's concussions is something I feel very strongly about. I've written a couple of blogs on it, and I feel like it's a very serious issue. And it's only been since the last few years that it's become addressed significantly more by the NFL. You've been involved with dealing with concussions and research with concussions. You started Athlete Speak. And in '94, I think you started to do seminars regarding concussions. What more can you tell me about that? I know it's something that's really near and dear to your heart.
So in the 1980s, I had a crisis of conscience. Some weekends I'm representing half the starting quarterbacks, and I watch them get hit in the head, and we go to doctors with the players and ask, how many are too many? What's the magic number? At what point should a player retire? And they had no answers. So in 1994, I held the first concussion conference, and we brought neurologists from across the country, helmet manufacturers, turf manufacturers, experts in every aspect. And I made sure the players were there. So we held the concussion conference in 1994, and I made sure that Warren Moon, Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Rob Johnson, Drew Bledsoe, a number of players were there and actually listened to the neurologist describe the problem. And we issued a white paper which talked about taking the head out of blocking and tackling, talked about a neurologist on the sideline, stressed a number of different approaches to it, and gave it to every one of the teams in the league and to the front office. Nothing changed. So we came back again in 2006, 2007 with the Concussion Institute and Warren Moon. We held another conference, and then the neurologists told us that 3 or more concussions cause an exponentially higher rate of Alzheimer's, premature senility, ALS, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression. So I called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic, and hoped that there would be radical change. So there's been some. We now have pre-season testing to establish a baseline. So we have baseline testing, we have a whistleblower edict, we have better protection against unnecessary hits. But the reality is that every time an offensive lineman hits a defensive lineman at the line of scrimmage, it produces a low-level subconcussive event. So an offensive lineman could walk out of football with 10,000 subconcussive hits, none of which have been diagnosed, none of which the player is aware of, but the aggregate of which will almost certainly do the same sort of brain damage that 3 knockout blows does. So if 50% of the mothers in this country tell their teenage boys, you can play any sport, but not tackle football, it won't kill professional football. It will just turn it into a gladiator sport with those people who need it to escape economic problems, like the people who box or play UFC. They'll be the ones involved with playing it. So that's why I've been working really hard on trying to find a helmet that does more than protect against skull fracture. So we have now found something called Tate technology that uses coil and compression to attenuate the energy field or displace it so it never hits the head. They're up to 46%. They think they can go higher. We need a series of nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals to heal the brain, better diagnostic techniques for the sidelines. So there are things we can be doing. We can't make the game completely safe, but we can certainly reduce the impact. And here's what makes this different than every other athletic injury. We know that football players will break down gradually the joints in the body, so that a football player retired at 40 might lean over to pick up his child and have aches and pains. It's another thing not to recognize that child. We're talking about the brain, the center of character, personality, memory, what it means to be a human being, a sentient creature, not that desk here, which is a piece of wood. So this is why this is a more critical issue, and we have to keep pushing on it.
It's wonderful that you're doing all that for concussions. It's amazing. Now, you grew up a huge Rams fan, so you must be very excited that the Rams are coming back to LA. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to the city of LA?
I think it's wonderful. Now, let me be clear. I don't favor moving teams and breaking the hearts of young fans. I think teams, by and large, should stay where they are and honor their fan base. They claim to be not just private businesses, but civic treasures, as much a part of the fabric. And, your St. Louis Rams, with the implied obligation to go see them when they're losing, to have loyalty if they're not doing so well. So then it doesn't make sense to me that a league keeps moving teams and breaking the hearts of fans. Having said that, it was never about fan loyalty. The Los Angeles market's always been about new stadia, state-of-the-art, and franchise value. And given that, it strikes me that it couldn't be better than having the team come back to its home, because from 1946 to 1994, the Rams were here, and we rooted for them. And they will be magnificently supported. We have 18 million people here. They'll sell out the games. They'll sell out the most expensive parts of a stadium first. We have massive industry here, and we have the entertainment industry who will buy the most expensive seats first. So they need to do some marketing. Los Angeles has two baseball teams, two basketball teams, two hockey teams, two soccer teams, UCLA SC. There's a tremendous amount to do. So they need to market and resell it. But Los Angeles is not immune to pro football. It hasn't been here, but it's still rated in fan surveys as the most popular sport.
And you have a lot of close relationships with team owners, Robert Kraft, Jerry Jones, and your previous business partner, Jeff Morad, who owns the Padres. Have you ever thought about becoming a minority owner or owning your own team, football, baseball?
The only team I'd be interested in would be one here in Southern California or in Northern California, which have been my two homes. But I like the freedom of being able to pick and choose who I work with, the causes I want to work with, being able to think about issues like domestic violence, bullying, climate change, concussion, and making a difference. So I've sort of been happy. And in the case of a football team, it's so prohibitively expensive that I think you need to be a high-tech billionaire to qualify.
Congratulations on signing Paxton Lynch, who looks to be the #1 quarterback going in the draft. There's been some comparisons with him and Joe Flacco. What can you tell me about Paxton and what really impresses you with him?
So he's 6'7". His hands, which they undermeasured at the combine, are almost a foot long. He's got incredible athletic skill. So he's big and strong in the new mode of quarterbacks, but he can escape the pocket and run nimbly like a much smaller person, like a Cam Newton. Like a Roethlisberger, he's big and strong enough to ward off some of the rush, but he can also scramble away from it. He can throw every throw. He's got a strong arm. He can elongate his body on 3rd and 1 like a Newton to get the first down. He's from a faith-based, strong family. Teammates love him. Good leader, very fast on the chalkboard. So he's the new mode of quarterback that we're about to see, stronger but athletic and able to move very, very well. So he had a good combine, but I think he'll blow it out on pro scouting day. It's a quarterback-centric league now. You have teams understanding that it's almost impossible to get to and through the playoffs to the Super Bowl without a franchise quarterback. And that would be someone you can win because of rather than with, who you can build around for 10 to 12 years, and who importantly can elevate their level of play in adversity. You know, you've thrown 2 picks, the crowd's booing, the center's looking at you like you're on certain substances, and now all of a sudden it's time to move. Can he elevate his play, compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind at that point? So that's the question.
You've represented over 300 athletes in your storied career from various sports. What advice would you give to somebody that would be looking to become an agent? You know, there's a lot of backstabbing in the industry, and you've dealt with some yourself, but you've maintained integrity. What advice would you give somebody?
We have gone across the country trying to hold agent seminars to try to create a new generation of sports professionals with ethics, with values, and with skill sets. They don't really teach you in law school or business school the specific skill sets needed to be successful. So let's start with the most important study, which is psychology. If you have the ability to understand why human beings act the way they do, to anticipate it, to interact in a way that's positive and constructive, you can navigate your way through life. So can you put yourself in another person's heart and mind? Peel back the layers of the onion until you really get into their inner core and understand in a deep way their deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams. That's the key to bonding. So it's listening, it's psychology, and then of course it's business, every manifestation or form of business. But and then a young person should have some value, mission statement, concept of why they're entering the field, what it is that they're trying to do. So for me, it's the ability to stimulate the best and empower young people, and then together we can go out and make a fundamental difference in the world in a positive way. But have a set of principles, and then it's the art of recruiting, negotiating, the ability to brand, the ability to market, the ability to counsel, and solve everyday problems in a creative way. Study psychology.
Well, thank you very much for sitting down with me. I'm very excited that you're back in the business, and with the struggles you've gone through, it's fantastic to see you where you are right now, and I look forward to seeing the future for you. So thank you very much.
You're very kind. Thank you.